I never imagined my life would shrink down to four walls and a single bed. The room I now called home was barely large enough to hold us both, me and my 19-year-old son, Adam. A single window let in thin light during the day, casting long shadows across peeling paint and a floor that creaked with every step. Outside, the city buzzed, but in here it was just us, bound together by necessity. It had been 6 months since I left my husband. Years of emotional neglect and the quiet discovery of his unfaithfulness had worn me down to the point where walking away felt less like a choice and more like survival. I thought the hardest part would be the loneliness. Instead, it was the struggle to rebuild a life from nothing. With rent prices swallowing more than half my income, I settled for this small room in a shared building, a temporary solution, I told myself. Adam had dropped out of college shortly after I left his father. He said it was because tuition was too expensive, but I knew part of him didn't want to leave me alone during such a fragile time. He carried the weight of our survival alongside me, running errands, finding odd jobs, even cooking dinner when I came home too tired to lift a pan. He'd always been a caring boy, but now that care took on a new intensity. Nights were the hardest. The narrow bed left little space, forcing us to sleep close. At first, it was awkward, two bodies adjusting to the uncomfortable proximity, but gradually it became routine. We'd talk before drifting to sleep, about his friends, my work, the small dreams we still kept tucked away. In those moments, it was easy to forget the chaos outside. Still, something unspoken lingered between us. I noticed it in the way his eyes lingered on me longer than before, or how he seemed more protective when strangers were around. Once, when a male neighbor stopped to chat with me in the hallway, Adam's jaw tightened, and he hovered until the conversation ended. I told myself it was just his way of looking out for me, but a quiet unease began to settle in the back of my mind. We were close, perhaps too close. I could feel the boundaries between mother and son blurring, not in a way I could define, but in a way I could feel. And yet, in my exhaustion and vulnerability, I didn't push against it. That night, as I lay in the dim glow of our single lamp, I wondered if this arrangement was giving us comfort or slowly changing us in ways I wasn't ready to admit. The winter came early that year, seeping through the thin walls of our rented room and settling into our bones. The little heater we had sputtered more often than it worked, so most nights Adam and I wrapped ourselves in the same blanket, sitting side by side on the bed as we talked. He'd tell me about the jobs he'd been trying to get, the people he'd met, the small frustrations of the day. I'd listen, smiling at his determination, though part of me ached knowing how much he'd given up to stay here with me. One night, I came home late from work to find the room spotless, the smell of my favorite soup filling the air. Adam greeted me with a warm grin and handed me a bowl before I'd even set down my bag. "You've been working too hard," he said, almost scolding, as though he were the one in charge. I laughed it off, but the way he looked at me, with concern so deep it felt like something more, unsettled me. Over the weeks, I began leaning on him in ways I hadn't expected. When my phone buzzed with an upsetting message from my ex-husband, it was Adam who took it from my hands, reading it with a frown before deleting it without asking. "You don't need his poison," he muttered, his hand resting briefly over mine. The touch lingered, warm and protective, but it also sent a quiet ripple of confusion through me. His compliments started to change, too. Before, they had been casual, "You look nice, Mom," but now they carried a different weight. "That color really suits you," he said one morning, his eyes holding mine a little longer than they should have. I told myself it was harmless, but a small voice inside whispered otherwise. The first time I truly felt the shift was when a former co-worker, Daniel, called to check in on me. We chatted briefly, laughter easing the heaviness I'd been carrying. But when I hung up, Adam's mood had darkened. He asked too casually who Daniel was, and when I explained, he simply nodded, though his jaw was tight. Later that night, he was quieter than usual, his glances sharper, as if he were keeping something to himself. Still, I let things continue. I told myself we were just close, closer than most, maybe, but nothing wrong. Yet deep down, I could feel the edges of something I couldn't quite name. It was like standing too close to a fire. The warmth drew me in, but I knew it could burn. One evening, as we sat in the soft glow of the lamp, his hand brushed mine. Neither of us moved it away. The moment stretched, silent but heavy, before he looked away and changed the subject. I went to bed that night with my mind racing, my heart caught between gratitude for his presence and fear of where this closeness might lead. The unspoken tension between us became a shadow that followed everywhere. It was in the way Adam's eyes tracked me when I spoke to other men, even casually. It was in how his tone sharpened when I mentioned anything about my life outside this room. The line between protection and possession was blurring, and I could feel it every day. One afternoon, while I was sorting laundry, my phone buzzed with a message from Daniel, the old coworker who had called weeks earlier. It was a simple note asking if I'd like to meet for coffee sometime. Before I could reply, Adam walked in, his gaze falling on the screen. His voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed him. "Who's that?" he asked. "Just a friend," I said lightly, slipping the phone into my pocket. That night, he didn't come home until late. When he did, his expression was unreadable. I asked where he'd been, but he avoided the question, instead launching into a quiet but pointed interrogation about Daniel. "Do you really think it's smart to see someone like that? After everything you've been through?" His words sounded caring, but there was an edge that made me uneasy. The next evening, after dinner, the air felt heavier than usual. He sat close beside me on the bed, his knee brushing mine. His voice was low when he said, "I don't like the thought of you with someone else." I laughed, nervously, thinking it was a joke, but his eyes didn't soften. "I'm serious," he continued. "You don't need anyone else. I'm here." Something in his tone made my chest tighten. The room felt smaller, the walls pressing in. My mind screamed that this wasn't right, but I was so tired of fighting loneliness, tired of pretending I didn't crave comfort. When his arm slid around my shoulders, I didn't pull away immediately. It was a terrible, quiet surrender, one that came more from weariness than desire. The moment passed, but it left a mark. From then on, we began moving around each other differently, guarded when others were near, but sharing unspoken looks when we were alone. It was as if we were keeping a secret neither of us had agreed to speak out loud. I told myself it was nothing, just a moment of weakness, nothing more. But the guilt had already begun to settle in my chest, heavy and suffocating. I found myself avoiding calls from friends, not because I didn't want to speak to them, but because I didn't want Adam to see. Then, one night, a message arrived from my sister. "We need to talk. I've heard things." The words lit a cold fire in my veins. If she suspected anything, others might too. And if others knew, I wasn't sure we could survive the fallout. I sat frozen, staring at my sister's message until the phone dimmed in my hand. "We need to talk. I've heard things." The words pulsed in my mind, dredging up the fear I'd been pushing aside for weeks. My hands trembled, not from cold, but from the realization that whatever fragile balance Adam and I had been clinging to was about to collapse. When Adam came home that evening, I didn't wait. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. He looked at me warily, as if he already knew what was coming. "My sister sent me a message." I began. "She's heard things, and if she's heard them, others might have too." His jaw clenched. "So what? People talk. We know the truth." I shook my head, my chest tightening. "Do we? Because I'm not sure I like what that truth has become." I took a breath, my voice trembling now. "Adam, we've crossed lines that should never have been crossed. We can't keep living like this, hiding, avoiding people, pretending it's all harmless when it isn't." He didn't speak right away. Instead, he sat down, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. "I just didn't want to lose you," he said quietly. "You're the only person I trust." His words pierced me. I knew that feeling, the desperate need to hold onto the one constant in a life that kept shifting, but I also knew where it could lead and the damage it could do. "This isn't about trust anymore," I said softly. "It's about boundaries, and we've lost ours. If we don't stop now, We'll ruin each other in ways we can't undo. The silence stretched between us until he finally nodded. It was a small, pain movement, but it was enough. That night, he packed a bag and left to stay with a friend. I didn't try to stop him. The room felt unbearably empty afterward. The quiet was no longer comforting. It was hollow, echoing with the absence of our late-night talks and the warmth of another presence. But as the days passed, the heaviness in my chest began to lift. I could breathe again, even if it hurt. In time, I reached out to Adam. Our conversations were shorter now, cautious, but they were honest. We didn't talk about the months in that small room. We didn't need to. Both of us knew the lines we had crossed, and both of us were trying in our own ways to step back onto solid ground. Looking back, I see that loneliness can be as dangerous as any betrayal. It can twist love into something it was never meant to be. If I've learned anything, it's that closeness without boundaries isn't love. It's a slow erosion of trust. And once trust is gone, rebuilding it is a journey neither of us is sure we can finish.